whatever you do, actually live it and do the work. And that's
Mhm.
going to provide a lot of ideas for you. If you're just sitting down, like, hey, I want to create a piece of content out of nothing, you're often going to have difficulty doing that. If you're actually living it, you're going to have a ton of ideas coming completely organically.
All right, Charles, let's do this, man. So I think a good place to start here would be kind of with some of the early days of your online business world. So you speak about the e-commerce days when you were launching different stuff and losing a bit of cash along the way. So how does someone go to leaving their job to losing, was it over $28,000 in total in the first 3 years?
Yeah, it was a lot of cash. It was my entire net worth at the time. So I never actually had a job. I decided I wanted to be self-employed in college. So it was I think the end of my junior year. I was listening to podcasts, kind of like your podcast, and I got the idea that I wanted to give entrepreneurship a try. So I started an Etsy store with my girlfriend actually, and that was my most successful venture for like the next 3 years. It went pretty well, and then we got shut down because I was not selling homemade products. Always follow the rules of your platform. There's a lesson.
Oh,
So that got shut down, and then I tried 2 more times, both times super generic, products, like watches, sunglasses, whatever else.
mhm.
Just was the wrong business model for me, for sure. I did not have the funding, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. So, I think total, that was about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years of just, making a little bit of money and then losing everything I had, essentially.
It happens, man. It happens. The exact same thing happened to me when I was 21. So I had well, not the 28,000 thing, but the selling the wrong products. So I was running an e-commerce store and I was doing like 90s vintage clothing. So Reebok, Nike, all that good stuff. And it was going pretty well. Not that well, but for 21-year-olds, not bad. And I got a letter that was like saying that basically like Nike or whoever it was are going to bring you up for third party infringement, copyright infringement. So you have to stop at this point. Otherwise, like we're going to press charges. So at that point, I was like, look, I'm out, I'm out of this. I'll come back to it in a few years.
Yeah, but literally probably 50 to 80% of people I talk to who are doing well in like services or content tried e-commerce and just did not go well at all. So this is a very common story.
Yeah, man, of course. Same with Dakota as well. When I had my podcast, he said he was doing like crypto, he was doing everything in the beginning, you know. But what did you learn from those though? Like what lessons did you take from that?
Uh, so number one, I much prefer to sell things that don't cost a lot to create. So when I was selling watches, for example, I was ordering those for about $40 each. They were pretty nice. And that's just a lot of money if you're trying to source, 200 or 1,000 of them. So lesson number one is, especially if you're on a low budget, sell services or content or code, because those all cost nothing, right?
Mm.
They take time, of course, to do it, but they don't cost you anything financially. So I would say, if you have a low budget, sell things that you can create and reproduce for very low or no cost at all. That's probably the biggest lesson.
Mm. What about the time element? Because of course, with digital products, like there's, you get back your time because you're selling them at scale, but there's a lot of time invested. But I suppose sometimes it's kind of high expense in the beginning for some products to build.
Yeah, yeah, it depends on the product, but yeah, that was a big lesson. And I think another one would be, sell things that are at least somewhat unique. So when I was doing e-commerce, everything was super generic, and there were,
Yeah.
big companies selling essentially the same thing who could easily undercut me because they're uh, producing 100,000 a year instead of
Yeah.
1,000 products a year. So uniqueness is important, and just choosing the right product for your budget, I would say, is the biggest one.
How do you think that affected your confidence after 2.5 years when like you were failing some of businesses? Did you think about going back to a real job?
Yeah, I was actually, so after I closed down that third business, I was applying for jobs at hospitals because I wanted to work 3 12-hour shifts and have the other 4 days for whatever next venture I was doing. So I wasn't
Mhm.
giving up on entrepreneurship, but I needed income. So I was looking for jobs. And a friend of mine at the time who I helped with his papers in English, I would like edit his papers. He was like, you could sell this. So I said, all right, I'm going to be an online English tutor, which turned into a copywriter. So
Mhm.
I was looking at just how do you monetize writing online. And the first thing I figured out was how to make an okay living on Upwork. So I applied for jobs for like 3 weeks, got one for writing blog posts, and then I got two more blog clients. And I was not doing all that well, but I was doing well enough that I didn't end up having to get the job.
Oh my god, man! So your first client was $50, if I'm correct.
I think it was 40. Yeah, it was a really nice guy. I should send him a letter, maybe buy him dinner. But
Send him
yeah,
your course. That's class, man.
exactly.
um, how did you get those clients? Because like you've no social proof, no testimonials, nothing.
Yeah. So early on, I had very low prices and I was working on Fiverr and Upwork. I don't necessarily recommend those platforms for freelancers, but that was where I got my first business. Um, on Upwork, it was just a lot of applications and waiting for someone to take a chance on a low value contract. So as you said, it was $40, $50. Not a huge risk there. Uh, and then through experience, I, became more confident, got case studies, and then I was able to raise my prices significantly because I had that social proof.
Did you have to walk off the likes of Upwork then because everyone competes to the bottom?
I didn't have to go off Upwork, but once I got into cold outreach, it was just going
Okay.
so much better than doing, one-time contract work, which was mostly what my Upwork gigs were. So it just
Mhm.
didn't make any sense to keep trying to do that because I was just doing better elsewhere.
Of course, man. Of course. How did you go about the cold outreach? What was the thought process in the beginning?
So the first thing I needed to do was figure out what my offer was going to be because you don't want to do
Mhm.
cold outreach and just tell people like, "Hey, I'll do anything for you."
I'll help you.
Even though, like, yeah, like when you're a rookie, like your gut tells you just like cast the widest net possible, do everything for everybody, but it's actually the opposite. You want to get more specific.
Mm,
So I decided I was going to write emails for health and wellness companies, mostly e-commerce. Some of them more like blogs and informational. So I chose that because I'd been into health for years. It was definitely a topic I was passionate about and knowledgeable about. So, and then I chose the email portion of it because that was going to lead to recurring work rather than just one time work. So
mm.
first I chose the offer, and then the offer and the audience, and then I could get started on actually doing outreach and A/B testing it.
Interesting, man. For a lot of those clients as well, I suppose like they'd be looking for, as you said, like reoccurring, but also looking for results. Like, did you see a lot of your work as like, okay, this is results based, or how did you kind of position the offer?
So in the beginning, I just wasn't good enough at selling things to build a
Mhm.
results based offer. I just didn't know that was even an option. So I just told people, give me a shot and we can try just like a week to start and then we can go from there. If I were
Mhm.
starting over again, I would add some sort of results based guarantee probably to my offer to make it more appealing. But in the beginning, I was just, I didn't know what kind of results I could get or what kind of results I could deliver. So I just
Mhm.
did a lot of outreach and waited for someone to take a chance on me.
That's interesting, man. And you weren't even in the audience space back then. You were just using
Yeah,
email.
not at all. So I started. I was doing cold emailing. I didn't even have social media accounts in the beginning. That was probably 6 years ago now. And then
Oh my
after
god.
roughly 2 years of freelance writing, I went on Twitter. I was in like an entrepreneurial community on Twitter, just like as a lurker, just reading stuff. And I was like, I know more than all these people. Let me let me just not all of them obviously, but there were people like selling, ridiculously expensive
Shit.
courses who I just knew like, hey, that guy has been freelancing for 3 months and he really doesn't know much
my
at all.
God.
So let me just be a better creator than a lot of people who are already doing this.
And that was the time as well, like 2017, 2018, when courses, they still are, some of them are just crazy expensive, like $2,000, $3,000. And of
Yep.
course, there's no substance behind them. Now, it's funny because some of them may have some substance and it might help you to get started, but for a lot of people, like they're really just pissing away money. So if you can come at it with a proper proposition, it's completely different. Then you're going to absolutely get an advantage, I guess, from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I came on, I just said, I'm just going to do this as a hobby and I'll hopefully get some clients from it. I had no plans to sell products, start businesses
Mm.
based on off the following. So I think it was good for adjusting my expectations early on, just to say like, hey, I'm just going to write as a hobby essentially. I'm going
Mm.
to do my best to sell a service and contribute to my freelancing business, and then had no expectations beyond that. I think that was useful for me.
That's an interesting kind of area, man. Because if you think about what we're exposed to at the moment, you have like the great guys like yourself. We mentioned Tim before previously. We were chatting, who were doing like really really well. So maybe younger people getting into space kind of have that expectation that they can go from zero to hero really quickly. Do you think that helped you in the beginning, that you're going into this as a beginner rookie mindset and having no expectations versus now people drop off really easily?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely useful to adjust your expectations. I was just when I was creating the course a few days ago, I was just writing slash talking about this. I
Hmm.
would say just like you want to go in and be a professional and a person who shows up essentially every day. So it's not like, oh, I'm like just a hobbyist and I'm going to do this when I feel like it. And when I don't feel like it, I'm not. So you want to be a
Yeah.
professional and actually do it every single day, or almost every day. But in terms of what your expectations are, I do think it's very useful to basically decide I'm going to make some cool connections. I'm going to get better at writing. I'm going to teach myself as I try to teach other people. And I'm going to try to be useful, and then, make some plans to try to get the results too. Like you can set up,
Yeah.
distribution, networking, etc. But having the mindset of focusing on the inputs rather than the results slash outputs, I think is very useful.
Mm. Yeah, because there's a lot of kind of, I suppose, like quick fixes, people trying to get to the end goal or just trying to get clients or probably doing things for the wrong reason. You may often see that as well. But I kind of see a lot of people kind of get into the space who are just trying to make money from it. Where I guess my background in podcasting came from me just being genuinely interested in this type of area, wanting to connect with people like yourself, and I naturally kind of grew from it. Same with yourself. You're obviously good background in English, so this stuff comes naturally to you. So I guess you leaned into your experiences and leaned into what you're good at.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah, man, it's quite interesting because the paradigm is completely different in terms of now. So, getting into some of your actual writing, of course, like you popped off on Twitter and obviously moved to LinkedIn recently, and I want to get your thoughts on LinkedIn actually because a lot of the Twitter guys moved across. What were your expectations beforehand, and then the reality then?
So I did not know that people created content on LinkedIn until probably about
Yeah,
18 months ago. And I started publishing content there probably about 15 or 16 months ago. So
nice.
I was just completely ignorant that it was even a platform for, 'cause I didn't even have an account. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm like, weirdly, my job is so much writing in public, but I don't have any personal social media accounts. I made Twitter. That was my first Twitter account ever, and I made it explicitly to write on it. So I actually discovered Justin Welsh on Twitter, and I was like, "Oh, this guy writes well. He seems like he knows what he's talking about." And then I discovered that he had this, massive LinkedIn empire. Essentially, I was like, "Okay, it's time for me to start repurposing over there." So I procrastinated on it for probably 2, 3 months, but then I started copy pasting my tweets over there, not really thinking about it. And then once I started catching on, um, it's kind of become, I have two major platforms, but I would say LinkedIn is probably my favorite at the moment, just because it's growing faster and generating more high quality leads than Twitter.
very very interesting, man. Because I'm like the exact opposite, and I know a lot of people are like the exact same too. So I would have thought Twitter was for fucking politics and sport. Bear in mind, but my best mate was like deep down the crypto like rabbit hole. So he was like, "Oh man, like there's always people like teaching other people about like trading here, whatever." And he's into it for years and years and years. So he was like getting a lot of value from it, and I was like, "Oh, but probably not applicable to me." And then it was Dan Coe was the trigger. Was I saw he was doing so well on Twitter, but then I saw him doing a tiny bit of work on LinkedIn. This was like 2 years ago at this stage now. And I guess kind of grew. And to be honest, I don't use it as effectively as I should. I'm mainly just using LinkedIn. But I think that's really cool, man. And like Justin Welsh is like, he's like the staple, like he literally was the
Yeah.
first. He was the first person to do it. But it's interesting because like I'm based in Singapore now. And there's a couple of other equivalent of guys that are based in Asia too, who write kind of career stuff, life stuff. But I guess for the online business space, it's really just a handful of people that really paved the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny how you can be on a certain platform for years and just kind of have blinders on and just not
Yeah.
see the other stuff, or you like see it but aren't totally convinced that you should do it. And then, within a few months of me jumping to LinkedIn, I was like, okay, this is really good. And then this year especially, it's been awesome.
Yeah. And like you maybe or may not be aware of it, but the fact that only 1% of LinkedIn create content is wild. So of all the users, only 1%. So if you compare that to Twitter or Instagram, like it's wild. And also like the average salary of a user is like 70,000 USD. Compare that to Instagram or Twitter. So the opportunity there for your business or for anyone's business is huge, and I'm a big advocate of using it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely noticed I don't want to say higher quality, but like people who are willing to spend more on LinkedIn for sure. It's a lot of professionals and just people who are more likely to invest in products and services.
I think they see the ROI easier. Like people will see it on Twitter and think, "Oh, this guy's a scam," or maybe not Twitter, but just in general. But then people see on LinkedIn, they're like, "Oh, he's serious," whatever, which is pretty cool. So let's get into some of like how you like have kind of popped off in general. So when you're writing and you're getting better at sharing your thoughts, what do you think were some of like the components of your tweets or posts that are what resonate with people?
Um, that is a huge question. Let me try to break it down. I would say there are a few things you can do that people are going to respond well to. Number one is I would say emotional resonance in general. So whether you're encouraging or inspiring or making them laugh, if you can make people feel something, they're gonna engage with your work. So I would say emotions. There are certain emotions that are very powerful, and if you can appeal to those, you'll get great engagement. And then the other side is delivering things that are legitimately valuable. Value is such an overused term in the content world, but giving people something that either gives them some sort of mental breakthrough or it's something they can literally just take and apply that day is also very powerful. So I found, especially lately, and especially on LinkedIn, people have been really liking simple how-to guides and lists that recommend tools or resources because they can just take that and they're instantly better off for it. So the very broad answer is make people better off after they've read or consumed your content than before. And then the ways you can do that are appealing to some sort of emotion and giving them a positive feeling or giving them something that is immediately applicable, like a new software tool to use or a how-to.
Mm. But of course, your writing is very specific, is specific to your writing. You're not writing like platitude stuff, just trying to appeal to the masses. So your emotion is much more driven towards still helping people. So how do you kind of write that element? Because of course, some people's emotion are just trying to get like attention,
Mhm.
and therefore they're not attracting the right business or opportunity or anything from there. So how do you think about that?
So the first step is to figure out exactly what your desired outcome is. So I don't think I've mentioned this yet. I am a ghostwriter. I help tech people and entrepreneurs grow their personal brands. That's my service offer. So I always start those interactions by asking what their desired outcome is. And there are some people who just want to be like C-list internet famous so that they can get more venture capital opportunities. So like I work with a guy and he's like, yeah, don't do like fortune cookie platitudes, but you can create pretty generic content. Like I just want to be famous like Gary Vee. I'm like, okay, we'll make you famous like Gary Vee. We'll do like
Man, the amount of people that I've had on that are like, do what you do, that say that is actually crazy. Like the amount of guys that are like Dakota said it. He was like, some guys just want to just grow. Like they don't
yeah.
give a shit who the followers are. They could be guys from fucking Brazil, but they just want to grow. So he's like, okay, I'll write anything, which is just
Yeah.
it's funny, right? Because their entire life is around KPIs, revenue, like proper growth and stuff. And they're like, yeah, just grow fucking anything on the internet for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. And then the other side of that, I'll have clients who have kind of niche agencies where they have, one niche they work with and one kind of specific service. And then for them, their desired outcome is, hey, I want clients. I worked with a guy who did CRL, conversion rate optimization. And he's like, I charge my clients like $5,000 to $10,000 a month. I want only the highest quality content, no platitudes at all. Let's just do, all applicable value all the time. So I think the most important thing is that you figure out what your desired outcome is, and then you can create content from there. So if you're just trying to build a bunch of followers, you can do semi-generic stuff. If you are trying to get high-ticket clients and customers, you can go the opposite way and focus mostly on applicable value.
Makes sense, man. Just on your ghostwriting, how do you do that for something you don't know about? So, like, if you're writing, I don't know, agency stuff on a nail and beauty salon agency, how can you work on something like that if you don't know the context?
Sure. So number one, a lot of you can create good social. Excuse me, had a nice burp there. You can create good social media content with fairly foundational information that you find on blogs and YouTube channels. You're not copying it, obviously, but you're learning the basics, and then you're creating somewhat basic content yourself. And then number two, me and my clients, we have different methods of them giving me information, but some of them have 30-hour courses that I can go through and turn into content. Some of them talk to me on the phone once every 2 weeks. So I can get basic foundational stuff from other content creators and from their past content, and then I can get advanced stuff through conversations with them or products they have.
That's a lot of research on your side, so as well.
Yeah. So yeah, research is definitely part of the game. It doesn't take as long as it sounds like it takes, but yeah, it's definitely part of the process.
So just even staying on this tangent for a bit. So of course that agency is done, wildly successful recently. How have you been able to scale it? I guess because you can't really scale your time.
Yeah. So I'm not interested in scaling to massive levels. I keep it to about 7 to 10 accounts at each time. So I work with one writer and one graphic designer, and I do a little bit of the work myself also. So I'm not a big time agency owner by any means. It's kind of like a hybrid between freelancing and having an agency. And I like that scale, and I'm focusing on products. And later this year, I'm going to build a software. So in terms of rapid growth, I'm looking more towards consumer stuff like products and software. And then if I ever decide I want to scale the agency, then I can do that.
Yeah, yeah, exact same as me, man. To be honest, as in I only have one graphic designer, one editor. That's it.
Yeah.
One production editor because it's a podcast agency, which is slightly different, of course. Back on the component side of the content because I think that's very interesting. So, we talked about the emotional side of things. So when you get to things like even like Twitter, um, are you ever writing things for clients or you see people that is more on the negative side of stuff, or is it more on the positive, affirmation or reinforcement of an idea?
Yeah, I go all positive pretty much. The most sorry, I don't know why I'm burping so much.
Take your time.
Thank
Take
you.
your time, man.
Um, so uh, the most negative I ever get with content is like mistakes to avoid or stories of failure and what you can learn from them. I don't
Mhm.
work with anybody who is super abrasive, and I don't work with anybody who is in like politics or anything like that. So I don't do that myself. They don't do that. Mostly stick to the positive side, and then you can make things, go it from a slightly negative angle with
Yeah.
things like mistakes to avoid.
That's cool, man. That's cool. What about the kind of psychology side of things? Like as you're writing, what do you hope the consumer? What are you trying to tap into from a consumer's perspective?
The number one thing I'm trying to do is catch attention. So when I'm writing the content, so we can break it down. The beginning of content is essentially a promise, right? Your
Mhm.
your hook is saying what this piece of content is going to do, and then the body of the content is delivering on that promise. So
Mhm.
when I'm thinking about psychology, it's almost always in the first 10, maybe 20 words, because that is when I need the psychology most, right? I need to hook people, I need to appeal to them, I need them to get into the rest of the content. There are a bunch of ways to do that. And then once we get into the body of content, I'm not really thinking about psychology at all. I'm just delivering on the promise. So I might write a thread that's like, um, yeah, what I think my first successful LinkedIn post, it was said something like, I've written every day for the last 1,500 days. Here are 19 lessons I wish I learned sooner. I forget what the exact hook was, but I'm thinking about psychology there, right? I'm creating interest in me, the author, by saying what I've done. I'm appealing to the reader by saying, I spent all this time doing this. You can
Mhm.
learn these lessons in a lot less time. And then once I actually get into the body, I'm just basically having a conversation. I'm just delivering on the promise and giving what I said I would.
That's super interesting, man. And I was thinking back to when Dakota was on our pod talking about the low perceived effort. So you've done 1,500 days of writing. Here are 18 lessons. So people are seeing like, oh, only 18. Oh, sorry. I only have to read 18 lessons to get all the information that you've done. So it's that aggregation of information, which is quite
Yep.
interesting, isn't it? Because it's like you talked about a personal experience and you didn't talk about the listener, or did I get that wrong in terms of like how you define it? Because sometimes you would want to be saying you and your to talk specifically to the reader.
Yeah, I think in general you're going to want to uh, appeal to the reader no matter what, and then
Hmm.
sometimes you're also going to want to talk about yourself. So I usually will, for a thread like that or a post like that, I'll say the personal experience in line one, and then I'll relate it to the reader in line two.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense because it's coming back to the reader, of course, you know. And
Yep.
in your course that you're coming out with, is that the sort of stuff that you're going to get into the details? Like, what is the kind of overview that you're going to be breaking down?
Yeah, it's actually massive. I think there's about 10 hours of video in it and 500 PDF pages. I covered basically
500.
everything. Yeah, it's a lot of like analysis of social media posts, what works, what doesn't. But I go through the whole process. It's kind of a step by step in terms of building a personal brand. But then there's
Mhm.
uh, a very long, in depth section on writing and content creation also. So it's kind of a
Mm.
writing, personal branding hybrid course. And I talk a ton about content in there.
What type of analysis were you doing in terms of like different types of content?
So basically, just taking uh, high engagement posts and analyzing why they worked. That is
Yeah.
one thing. And then also turning them into very rough templates. And then the
Mhm.
third thing was analyzing the hooks specifically. So I have something like 150 PDF pages of analyzing posts. And then there's like a 30 pager on hooks and a 50 pager on templates.
Oh my god, man, that is insane. Okay, and we're going to include all that down below as well. But to get into some of it, so even the hooks itself, like what sort of findings do you have, I guess, in that area? Like what makes a great hook?
There's a lot to it. There's so many different
There's
strategies you can
50
take.
pages to
Yeah, I mean, I
it.
could pull that document up right now if you want. But I would say there are two basic kinds of hooks. There are ones that start with you or like a client result. So the one I would just said to you out loud. I've written
Yeah.
for 1500 days straight. That's a classic. And then you can also just do one liners where you're just saying exactly what you're promising in the post. So I would say you want to make your promise as appealing as possible. And there are a bunch of ways to do that. So you can say, I have this experience. Now let me help you do something similar. Or I did this for my client. Let me help you do something similar. Or you can just go very straight up like Dakota often does. It'll be like the very simple example. You could say, 10 free courses that'll teach you more than a $50,000 college degree. So there's little tricks you can do in writing and language, but you mostly just want to make the promise of the post as powerful and big as possible, as long as you can actually deliver. You don't want to over exaggerate too much.
Yeah, it makes sense, man. It makes sense. So, what other aspects are there in terms of like when you're doing different types of research and content? Because if things are changing on social media so frequently, how do you adapt towards like, I don't know, changes in like how LinkedIn show great posts and whatnot? How do you keep up to date with that?
I don't think about algorithms almost ever. I
Yeah,
think about trends a little
trends.
bit,
Yeah,
but most of the principles I use to create content are evergreen principles, and you don't really, they don't really change. So an example is, I was just giving you different types of content that work. That kind of stuff has been working for years. I would
long
say
before social media.
yes, exactly. So like an example of how I would take an update uh, in the social media game is like LinkedIn carousels have gotten really big lately, where you upload a PDF rather than just text. So I'll adjust to trends like that. I'm making carousels for myself. I'm making them for my clients now. But in terms of the content itself and the persuasive elements you're using, I don't think those change very much.
Yeah, makes sense. Of course, there's just great content. Same with videos. Whether like people YouTube prefer 7 minutes or 14 minutes or even podcasts. Because I often see that in podcast game as well. Is that sometimes like the shorter clips are doing well, the longer clips, it is what it is. You know what I mean? But it goes back to providing value that's actually valuable and creating actually decent work from there. Um, a good question from here, I guess, from in my own head is around like what are you trying to get the user to do afterwards? What is your kind of call to action? Are you always trying to drive newsletter subscribers? Is that the goal?
So it depends on who I'm working with. When
Mhm.
I'm writing for myself, I'm almost always doing the newsletter. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm adding a comment, and sometimes I'm adding a PS at the end of the posts, plugging the newsletter. On
Mhm.
Twitter, I'm adding a tweet below the original tweet.
Yeah.
When I'm pushing an offer, I'll change what I'm plugging. So I'm now hyping up this course that I'm coming out with. If I have open ghostwriting client spots, I'll talk about that. So it all depends on, again, what your desired outcome is. For some of my clients, we're just asking people to follow if they enjoyed the content and want more. Some of them want calls booked, right? They don't have a newsletter at all. They run an agency or they're freelancers. So it all depends on your desired outcome, I would say.
Of course. When I was speaking to Tim on Wednesday, he was giving me a proper education about newsletter, but how important has your own newsletter been for like your business, let's say from a conversion perspective?
Oh, it's huge. It's my highest conversion channel for sure.
Mhm.
Uh, I get something like 40% open rates, which is a lot. You post on social media, maybe 2 to 15% of people that follow you are going to see it,
Man, and
usually
how
on the
many
lower end.
how many subscribers do you have?
I think I just got over 16,000.
Man, that's wild.
So yeah, newsletter is very, very important, and it's an asset you own too. So you can never get that taken away from you. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a foundational piece of what I do. I don't recommend people, if you have 10 followers, you probably don't want to start a newsletter just because it's going to be wasted time. There's no ROI on that. But once you get to like 10,000 ish, definitely a channel I recommend exploring.
Really? You think at 10,000 that's when you would start it?
I mean, it's hard to say exactly. It's hard
Of
to
course.
make generalities about it, but
Yeah.
the general principle is you definitely want to get a decent following first. So maybe
Nice.
10,000, maybe a little bit higher, but I think under that, probably not.
That's interesting because Tim was giving me so much shit for not having one recently, but I had one for my podcast, and see, I was always coming out with episodes, so like episode updates, and then I did it and like, yeah, like it's fine, whatever. But then I was like, he was telling me, he was like, man, you have to, like, he was like, you have to do it. And he went into like all these levels of detail. And then on like Wednesday at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I was like, right, this is, this is when I'm doing it. And then he messaged me today being like, I saw you did it. And I was like, yes, I was like, I had to. So it's fun though, but I see a complete ROI going forward. I think especially when you become more niche and skilled, like people are getting like actual value from it, and
Yeah.
like yeah, of course, like you can never say never would if you potentially lost on a platform or whatever, like that would be hugely impactful for your business.
Hmm. Yeah,
what do you
it's
think
an
about
insurance
the
policy for sure.
what do you think about the ROI in terms of like actually your revenue that's coming back off it in terms of ghostwriting clients and stuff?
Um, I weirdly do not get a lot of clients from newsletters. I feel like newsletters are often uh, a channel for beginners and intermediates. So a lot of the people I work with are earning, 50K plus per month, or they had their startup acquired and they're partially retired now.
Yeah,
So a lot of those people just aren't on the newsletter, and I'll get them inbound on social media for whatever reason. So on the client side, I have not gotten that many clients from my newsletter. It's more customers on the newsletter.
I actually always thought about that as well because, like, for instance, what you do ghostwriting for, like, CEOs, like how many CEOs of like CRM systems are reading ghostwriting posts at the weekend? I always think about that. Like on LinkedIn maybe, and on Twitter they might just follow. But I tend to think about like, right, Sunday morning after working 100 fucking hours in this building, I'm gonna sit down and listen to this guy's to read this guy's post. It just doesn't seem like logical. Sometimes I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I have gotten a fair amount of inbound leads from people actually reading my content, but a lot of it is referrals from current clients, and a lot of it is people will say like my someone who works for me follows you and said that I should talk to you. So
Of course, man.
you never know if someone's actually going to consume your content or they're just going to hear about you from somebody who consumes it.
And come back as well. I thought that was quite interesting. I was speaking to a mate recently yesterday who said like something about like a response today could be like money 18 months away. Now he's selling a very expensive software, but I thought it was very interesting. It was like, like potentially someone saying no or saying it's not the right time can literally be 2 years away for some of these deals because they're 10K a month or 20K a month or whatever. Um, I'd like to get into the audience building side. So what would you kind of focus on for people 0 to 10,000?
uh, so that's kind of a large range. I would say 0 to 1,000 or 3,000 or so. You want to create a little bit of content, but you want to be doing a lot of engaging, and you want to be building out distribution systems. So when I say distribution, I'm talking about what is your plan for getting people to read your content. Um, you can pay for distribution if you have that. Some people, it's against terms of service, I believe, but people sell retweets and other types of social media engagement.
I
Um,
never knew that until like a month ago. I
yeah,
had no idea about that, man. That's a
yeah, that's a
big
huge
fucking
part of it.
business, no?
It is, yeah. So I would say you want to create enough that people know you're in the game and that you have valuable content on your profile so that when people view it, they follow you. But you want to be focusing more on how are you going to get a foundation of followers so that you can grow organically. So if you have no budget, you're probably engaging a ton with other people's content, engaging with people who are engaging with their content and their replies, sending DMs, not trying to sell anything, just connecting with people. So just building out as much free attention as possible. And then if you have some funding, you can think about paying for promotion to get your foot in the door. So I would say people who have a very small following most often don't think enough about distribution, and they just publish and hope when you should have more of a plan.
That's interesting, man. How would you advise going about the engagement path? So trying to like engage more with other bigger accounts and to try to get your name out there.
Yeah, I would recommend, first of all, you want to choose people who are in your niche or near it. So if you're a marketer, you probably don't want to be engaging a ton with fitness people, right? If you like somebody, you can do it. It's not a problem, but you want to stick to mostly accounts with the kind of followers you want. Um, and then it's kind of just a matter of showing up and executing every day or close to it. So you can choose an amount of time that you have per day. Maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 30. And then you choose like 25, 30 accounts. Say, I'm going to engage with these people just about every day. And some of them can be larger, some of them mid sized, maybe some around your size too. But just choosing accounts that you like and have followers that you might want to, quote unquote, steal from them, and then
Mm.
executing pretty much every day, and just either being friendly and like kind of just like giving them friendly comments or adding to the conversation and being valuable.
Yeah, because that's an important piece about like trying to actually add value and not just saying the post back to them backwards,
Yeah, you
at
don't want to
times.
do that.
Yeah. So like what's your kind of advice on that? Because if you open up like Justin Welch's post, you're gonna see like 600 of the same comments different ways. That's not unique then. Like that's a potential time sink.
Yeah. So advice number one is to also comment on people's posts who don't get 1,000 comments per post. But
In the first minute.
yeah,
Because
to
because
to
he
actually,
started with that, you started being like, comment on this post and people will see it, and then everyone's like, okay, let's comment on everyone's post as a result.
yeah. So
So
I think the way to differentiate yourself is to show a little bit of personality. It's very hard to give specific advice on how to do that,
of
but
course.
if you
You can
think,
you can pick an example if you like, even just for your own sake.
um, I think humor is definitely a good one. Like if you can joke around with somebody, that's always good. It's hard to teach humor, of course. And then I would say that if you're trying to go like the value delivery route, add to the conversation in some way. Treat it like the post itself was someone saying something to you, and then you are replying to them with something new. So you're not just agreeing with them or summarizing what they're saying. That is the beginning of the conversation, and then you are continuing the conversation with your reply.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense because you're just chatting or having a normal conversation like we are. We're kind of going back and stuff like the way it should be, I guess, without the digital world.
Yeah.
Um, as you scale up, so you're looking at like say 3 to 6,000. When do you start really focusing on quality content?
Yeah, I think 3,000 is about right. Uh, Maybe 5,000 or so. And you're always wanting to create quality content, but it's more increasing your frequency.
Mhm.
So in the very beginning on Twitter, maybe you tweet twice a day and do one thread per week. Very beginning on LinkedIn, maybe you do 3 posts per week. And then once you get your foot in the door, um, there's all kinds of frequencies that work, but you might want to up your frequency just a little bit.
Yeah, I loved your post the other day about like not putting 15 posts on the timeline and you end up burned out, and also only doing the ones that like actually fit your schedule. Because I guess like people will either try to like overdo it or go under on what they can actually achieve then as well at the same time.
Yeah, it's important to find a balance where, like, number one, you don't need to knock it out of the park with every single post. It doesn't need to be a 20 tweet thread or a beautiful carousel. You could just share a simple thought if you want. Um, but yeah, you can keep it pretty simple and fairly low effort and still post almost every day. Um,
Mhm.
or you can, it just depends on your identity and your preferences. So maybe you do 3 super high quality posts per week, or maybe you do 2 super high quality and like some on other days that are just like more normal thoughts or very quick tips.
Yeah, of course, man. One thing that I have found quite a lot from like the LinkedIn crowd and Twitter crowd is going back from LinkedIn to Twitter. guys don't necessarily get the same growth, whereas guys who come from Twitter to LinkedIn do because they validate the content and everything. So generally, like, how do you break down a longer LinkedIn post for Twitter?
Um, what do you mean by break it down?
Well, the first thing is like character limit, of course. So like you're working with 180 or 260 or whatever it is. So if you have like a longer like list type style post on LinkedIn, do you ever go back from like a LinkedIn post to Twitter?
So I started writing on Twitter, so that's kind of my home base, and that's where I
Yeah.
start all my content creation.
Yeah.
So I usually write a version that is underneath the 280 characters of a post. I'll just give you my entire content strategy right now. It's very simple.
Let's do it.
So I have 2 tweets per day. One of
Okay.
them is about like 250 characters, like near the limit, and then one of them is shorter, and it's just like a very quick thought or quick tip. And then I take the longer tweet and I turn it into a LinkedIn post. So if the longer tweet is 80 words, 250 characters, the LinkedIn one might be 50% longer. And then one time per week, I write a Twitter thread and I turn that into a carousel. So LinkedIn definitely responds better on average to medium to long length content. So I take my, you know, long in terms of tweets, my long tweet, and I make it longer for LinkedIn every day. If I was going in the reverse, I would just do the opposite. So I might write a 200 word LinkedIn post and then I'd shave it down to 80 or so for a tweet.
That's interesting, man. How do you plan your content? Do you do it all in one go, or do you space it out?
Uh, it depends. So because I'm a ghostwriter and I, have created hundreds of posts per week, this feels like not a lot to me, but 2 tweets per day and one LinkedIn post with, it being repurposed feels like almost nothing to me.
Yeah.
So I mostly just do it by inspiration. I'll be working on some client work and I'll think of a principle I want to share. Um, or I'm just, on a walk or living my daily life and I'll think of something. And then if inspiration runs out and my schedule is dry, I'll go to other creators who I respect a lot and just use their content to get inspiration and jog my memory. So I might go to a friend's Twitter profile and see a recent tweet of his and say, that's a format that works. Let me fit my own idea into that format. Or I'll see the idea he wrote. He says, okay, that's a good idea. That resonates with people. Let me give my take on that idea, or let me relate that to one of my experiences. So it's
Yeah.
mostly inspiration. And then if I'm running out, I'll usually use other people's content to jog my memory.
That's cool when you're working so much on client work and you're so down that rabbit hole that you can use those learnings to write content. And I actually, funnily enough, I started doing something similar. Like Jason, like, obviously not to the same level you are, but if I'm ever on a call, a sales call, and if I get objection from someone that says, "Look, let's say for instance, we don't see value in X," and if I had a solution to it, I would usually write that solution as like an inspiration for a post because I'm always in the loop of getting feedback, user feedback, validating it, and trying to come up with a solution. So those are other common problems that people have, let's say. And I found that to be very helpful because it's like this is something that's like on the line what people are trying to learn or they're trying to figure out, and you're trying to provide them that solution at the right time.
Yeah, one of the biggest pieces of advice I have for content creators is to live the content you create. So if you're a fitness person, you should be working out every day, and hopefully, if you're
Shredded.
training clients, then and if you're like I write about writing and content, I'm writing and creating content every day. You are podcasting, you're creating content about that. So whatever you do, actually live it and do the work, and that's
Mhm.
going to provide a lot of ideas for you. If you're just sitting down like, hey, I want to create a piece of content out of nothing, you're often going to have difficulty doing that. If you're actually living it, you're going to have a ton of ideas coming completely organically.
And that's why it's funny because when you went very very specific on like writing and a specific area of like audience building, like for instance, you get more ideas than if you wrote platitude content about the hobo CEO. Like you're actually able to generate way more ideas because you're so focused. And I kind of felt that too, and I know many other people are at the same level. Um, I'd like to get into some of the ideas with the personal branding. So of course, that's kind of like around your course. You're focused on that now. Personal branding in the LinkedIn terms is like typical, it's like kind of like cringe kind of content because everyone's like, you should need a personal brand. But I know what you're getting at, of course, with your approach to it. Um, what's your philosophy behind that area of personal branding and the kind of components of it?
Um, yeah, this is another big game that's tough to break down. I'll do my best though. I would say you want to meld your personality with what works. So you don't just want to follow trends. You want to dig deep and, number one, identify who you are and what value you have to offer. And number two, what you're trying to get out of your personal brand before you start it. So it's this mix of what works, like what the trends are, what the algorithm likes, etc., who you are as a person, and what you are looking for. So I would recommend people who are early on or people who haven't started yet, you want to figure out those things, right? Who am I and what value am I going to deliver? Why should people consume my content? What is working in general? How can I meld those two things? And also, how can I create content and act in a way that gets me towards my desired outcome?
What would you say your values are around that?
What was that?
What would you say your values are when it comes to like personal branding?
Um, I mean, the big thing I'm trying to help people with is writing better and learning the uh, logistical portion as well. Things like distribution and exactly how you should be engaging. But yeah, the value of my brand is making it so that people don't have to get their ass kicked for years like I did and just fail over and over again. Kind of providing a shortcut on personal branding and audience building in general.
Yeah, of course. And I think it kind of adjusts over time too, in some regard. Like for instance, like you were the e-commerce guy and you tried to get into that and you went down that path and then you went into writing and now you've learned these lessons and every aspect of writing is used for your business for copywriting and stuff. So it's hugely influential in other aspects, but it's okay to evolve because I feel sometimes people reach out to me as well. They're kind of saying that they don't know what their brand is. And fundamentally, like it will take a time for you, take a while for you to figure that out yourself and what to try to focus on. It's evolutionary to some degree.
Yeah, I was just writing something about this. For some people, it's very obvious what you're going to do and what you're going to talk about. If you're like when I started, I was a copywriter who wanted clients, so obviously I'm going to talk about copywriting. When it's not as clear, I think probably the best way is to create a big goal and then document the journey of it. So some people are like, "Oh, I want to lose 100 pounds in the next 2 years." Like that would be an awesome brand. You don't um, necessarily have the results right now, but documenting that journey would be awesome. My Twitter and LinkedIn bio up until a few weeks ago was a ghostwriter building my income to $1 million per year. So if you're not 100% sure what you should be creating about, you can try starting with a goal and then documenting the journey of it.
That was my first introduction to you about a year and a half ago. So I remember seeing that tagline and thinking, that's unique. That was the first thing I saw. And I saw the photo, of course. But isn't that really interesting though? Like that you're like, yeah, an ambitious goal like that. And I looked at it and I was like, oh. And I remember thinking, being like, this guy may only be making 40K a year, but it was the idea in the tagline that was really drawing towards me. And that
Yeah.
was, oh man, that could have been about a year ago, I think, at this
Yeah.
stage. That's cool. That's really cool. Um, what would you say good versus bad personal branding is?
Uh, let's start with bad. Let's have some fun.
The
So
hobo CEO.
I think the worst thing you can do is be super inconsistent and think about what you want to get out of your brand rather than actually building it. So that's not like a tactic specifically. It's more your mental approach to it. I think the absolute worst thing you can do is daydream about how nice it would be to have a decent sized brand and never actually do anything. In terms of tactics, I would say the worst thing people do is they just create content that doesn't lead to a positive outcome for their audience. So whether you're appealing to emotion or whether you're giving them something applicable, what I was saying before, you want them to be better off after reading your content than before. And the biggest mistake I see people make is they just write about some random personal experience or some thought they have that doesn't actually help anybody. So I would say you always want to be thinking about, what is my reader going to take away from this? How is this
Yeah.
helping them? That's the number one. So, and then the good side is the opposite of the mistake I just laid out. So
Yeah.
people who do personal branding well, everything they're publishing pretty much, you can just publish like random thoughts here and there, but almost everything they're publishing, they're thinking about, how is my reader going to react to this and how are they going to be better off for having read this?
It's funny because the bad side of it is kind of how some entertainment content is created. So, video specifically. So, like YouTube Shorts, YouTube in general, TikTok, Reels. Of course, there's the educational side of it, but a lot of the entertainment side of stuff, bullshit stories, is kind of where some of that's drawn from. But then you see it on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they're meant to be platforms that are like helping people. So it's kind of like people lean into that side of the world, and the posts will have zero substance because they're trying to just entertain people, but not actually do it in some thoughtful way that's somewhere like applicable to the platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, man. Of course, like to get into that right mind of thinking, and it was speaking to people like yourself that it helped me a lot with this stuff, and it actually helped my podcast too because we get on this episode and we're like, okay, talk about writing, improve people's writing, the business side of things, and it works really well. Um, I'd like to ask you about money. So, of course, you went from the ecom days to building a very successful ghostwriting agency. How do you think your like relationship with money has changed over time?
Um, I would say having money is a lot better than not having it. um,
True.
uh, yeah, I feel like my relationship with money has almost not changed at all. Having very, very little of it, you're constantly in a state of like light anxiety or maybe even heavy anxiety, and it's absolutely brutal. But the difference for me between earning, say, $6,000 a month and, you know, up from there, maybe double or triple that, has not changed very much. So I never had that uh, unhealthy relationship with money, but I've definitely come to realize just, it was so hard to earn money when I was first starting out, mostly because of who I was trying to sell things to and what I was selling. So I'd say my biggest evolution in my mindset with money is, you want to sell very valuable things to people who have a lot of cash. If you're not doing that, it's going to be a struggle, right? Obviously, there are tons of budget services and products that do very well, but
Mhm.
especially as a freelancer, a solo creator, a small time entrepreneur, the biggest thing you want to do is figure out how to deliver a very valuable outcome to people who have a nice amount of money. And if you can do that, you're going to do very well, right? When I started freelancing, I had no idea that people even charged $2,000 a month for services. And then now I know people who do 10K plus a month for services. Like, that was completely foreign to me.
Yeah.
And
The
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry,
Um,
the only time where I saw that was a guy was on my podcast called Tristan Pellegrino, and beforehand I went onto his website, and it was like 6,000 a month for like podcast work. And I remember saying to him, being like, "Your prices are on your website," and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, I know." He was like, "I'm sick of telling people," and "Who?" I was like, "Who pays you this?" And he was like, "Really, really rich people." And then sorry, I'm laughing because when you said that about like selling to rich people, I sent a photo to my mate earlier of like a fucking list of like people, and I was like, life hack: get rich by making rich people richer. And then he was like,
Yeah.
yeah, true. And I was like, and that kind of is the philosophy in a service based business, of course. Of course, as you mentioned, you can do $10 products if that works.
But yeah, the biggest thing, the biggest evolution for me was just building something that delivered a seriously large amount of value, and then only selling it to people who have enough to invest in it. So that's what blew up the service side. The product side of what I do, it does well. It's kind of like a side income for me. Services is my primary income. But yeah, that's the biggest thing for sure.
How have you seen maybe other creators in the space kind of maybe change as they become more successful in terms of the money they make, the status they get? Does that play a big factor, you think, in this space?
Um, I don't think anybody I've known has really changed all that much. I guess the biggest thing is we talk about like abundant mindsets all the time, like people in the self-improvement space. I think the biggest thing is once you start earning a nice amount of money is having an abundant mindset gets very easy because you literally have abundance. So if you're on a call with somebody and you're struggling to pay your bills and you think they might be a bad fit, it's still difficult to say no to that person because you don't have real abundance in your life. If I get on a call with somebody who gives me a weird vibe, I'm out immediately because I have that actual legitimate abundance behind me. So that's the biggest thing is it just helps you act with abundance in terms of who you work with and the opportunities you take.
That's cool, man. Were you in those positions previously whereby you didn't want to take a deal but you had to do it because to make rent and shit?
Yeah, very early on, I worked with a client who was just kind of disrespectful. And I worked with him for probably 5 months. And since then, I don't think I've worked with anybody that I haven't liked. One thing I'll add to what I was just saying is it's not just money abundance that can help you act with abundance, it's also opportunity abundance. So, in services specifically, it's very difficult to say no to a poor fit if you
Hmm.
have one call that week. If you have 15, 20 discovery calls in a week or 2 weeks, it's very easy because that's another form of abundance. So my general thought on abundance is you do your best to fake it in the beginning, and then you work your ass off until you have legitimate abundance, whether it's discovery calls or clients or enough cash, whatever it might be. Work until you have actual abundance, and then it gets very easy.
Of course, because I think you're treated as someone who can deliver results, and you're trying to insert that confidence to some degree. Um, at what point? So you mentioned about the audience growth and that aspect. When you get to the product side of things, um, when do you move from service based to product based? Like, what would be your recommendation for creators in that space?
So it's going to depend on what the price is on the product. So if you're selling a product that is $500, you could get started pretty early because you'll have a decent ROI even if you get 10 customers a month. If you're going a lower priced product, you definitely want to wait until you have more leverage. The very general number is something like 10 to 30,000 followers, I would say, before you come out with a product, because before that, you're just not going to have enough eyeballs to really make it worth it. So I think I created my first product at like 6,000 followers, and I literally sold 0 copies of it in a month. I could not get somebody to buy this thing, and I retired it and came out with a different one later. But I think my second one, I had something like 10 to 13,000 followers, and it did pretty well. So I think 10K is a decent rough approximation for when you should start thinking about consumer offers rather than just service offers.
What was the difference in product one and product two?
Um, Product one was just like an hour long video of me talking about how I freelance. And then number two was a social media, it was Twitter specifically, a Twitter writing ebook. So
Mm.
I got a lot better at selling it and, setting up buzz. Like the first one, I just came out with the product one day. I just created it and I released it and nobody wanted it. The second one, I actually hyped it up to my followers and got some desire created. And then once it actually came out, that plus the larger following made it a decent success.
That's very, very interesting, man. Because I think, to be honest, I'm in quite a similar position. But I think the reason why I created my course for my podcast was because people would often say like, "Oh, like I can't work with you because you're charging X amount or whatever." So like whatever, and then there'd be a nice resource as a result. It's like, "Oh, here's a low hanging fruit for like $200." So it was kind of, and that was the reason why I actually did it. It was like a Justin Welch recommendation was like they can't afford it, they just get the lower hanging one. Now, of course, it doesn't sell 10,000 copies a fucking month, but that was the whole reason was like just do it. And I think it costs like $1,200 to host a year, which may
Mhm.
seem like a lot. And to be honest, it actually is kind of a lot. It's a fucking course, but at the but you know what I mean. It's software, but
Yeah.
yeah, like that was the kind of methodology behind it. I guess it wasn't to be done to sell loads, and that's kind of I still don't really know was it a good idea, to be honest. You know what I mean? But I think we're all just figuring things out along the way. That's kind of my thought
Yeah.
process on it.
I mean,
So
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
I
you're
would say
fine.
that the worst case with creating a product is you just crystallize your knowledge because when you create like an educational product, a how to, you learn so much and you get materials that you can come back to yourself. So I wouldn't say people should be scared of creating a product because it's going to be such a waste of time. You can create something and then just give it away for free or use it yourself, which is very useful.
Or use it as upsell basically in some regards. So if a client signs with you, you just gives them the product for free. And you're like, oh, here's like some do it for you pieces if you want to use. That's kind of what I was using too. If people wanted to, I don't know, it was just a nice kind of piece to include, you know. Um, I wanted to ask you on like the revenue side of things. So when you're kind of going from like zero to $10,000 a month, what are you focusing on?
Uh, so if your following is fairly small, I would say you want to optimize your bio and your profile so that when people click on it, they trust you and know what you do at the very least. You want to create a little bit of content uh, that signals competence, and then you're mostly going to be focusing on your offer and doing cold outreach. You can hit 10K a month with 100 followers, right, easily because you're just doing cold outreach, and that's the primary way you're getting people. So if I say if you're starting from zero and you want to get to 10,000 a month as soon as possible, uh, build a skill if you don't have one already. Figure out how to make it a recurring offer that costs, probably 1,500 a month minimum up to like 3, 4K maybe, and then do a bunch of cold outreach, personalize it, and try to get people on a service offer.
That's cool, man. How long would you recommend initially for contracts for people? Like, try to get them on 3 months, 6 months.
Uh, it really depends on the offer. I actually still don't do contracts. I never have. I just go month to month, and that has worked just fine for me. The retention on that is very high just because the service is good. So that's going to depend. I think as a beginner, especially, it can be a little bit difficult to get people on contracts. So yeah, I'm not like the service business expert. I would say it depends on your offer and maybe go month to month if you're a total rookie because it's going to be harder to convince people to sign up for a contract if you don't have a ton of social proof already.
Yeah, I remember Tim telling me saying that in the beginning he was doing monthly and people could cancel at any time, and I think he was doing refunds too. That was back
Yeah.
in 2011. 2011, man, I was like 10 years old at that point,
I'm
man.
going to remind Tim that he's an old man next time I talk to him.
I wasn't 10, I was like 15, but it's all the one. When you're under like 21, you're like 15. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
so when you scale that 10 to 30,000 a month, like how do you go from 10,000 to 30,000 a month?
So you can just have like a very high value offer that sells a lot. Just so the listeners know, I'm at like 25K or so per month on my services. So I'm not the guy to talk to about high level scaling. The way I've gotten to near the top of that range, number one, just having a good offer that doesn't take a ton of time, but delivers enough value that you can charge solid prices for it, right? Because you want to sell an outcome for sure, right? Because you don't want to say, hey, I'll work for you 20 hours a week and you pay me this amount, because then there's a hard cap on how much you can earn. If you're selling a result and you learn how to deliver that result in a fairly low amount of time, you can scale as a freelancer or as a very small agency owner up to, $20,000-$30,000 a month. And then the second thing would be just outsourcing the very tedious, time consuming stuff. So that's going to keep you sane, and it's also going to help you scale. So for my offer, I used to create graphics in Canva, and I'm so bad at design, and it was such a waste of time. I would spend an hour creating like a simple Instagram carousel. So I have somebody do that for me now. I sacrifice a tiny bit of profit and I save a ton of time. So figuring out your offer and getting your pipeline fairly full is going to get you up to that 30,000 a month roughly, and then uh, just hiring a tiny bit, right? Getting 1, 2, 3 freelancers on staff can help you scale further because you have more time yourself.
That's very, very interesting, man, because I think you do need to put the time back in your pocket, especially if it's service based, because you're technically only making more money if you get bring in more clients or if you charge higher prices. So that's of course like the importance of it. You spoke there about outcome. So outcome for you coming from wrong is more leads, better followers, more newsletter subscribers, whatever. Um, what you do when the outcome is not necessarily revenue generating to some degree. Of course, everything to some degree is revenue generating, but how do you position that for people?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to do this. You can literally sell an outcome, right? If you're a lead generator, you sell leads for however much per lead. And then if you aren't selling a literal outcome, you are, right, selling an outcome persuasively, even though you're just selling the service. So it's going to depend on what your service is, because the benefits of building a personal brand are so wide. I don't really do any KPIs with my clients. Um, they tend to be satisfied enough to stay on. I think my average client stays for like 6+ months. So for my service specifically, it is difficult to quantify beyond just followers and maybe newsletter subscribers, how well it's going. But yeah, either sell a literal outcome if your service delivers the same outcome every time. And if it doesn't, you can use outcomes persuasively, but sell just, a service, whatever you do.
That's very interesting, man, because I thought yours would be a bit more rigid. Speaking to a few other ghostwriters, people say that some people are very specific, and I suppose if they're like from a CEO background, they could be a bit anal about that stuff. But you obviously just write like really well and build a good community around it that is quite unique.
Yeah, I think some of my clients track what I'm doing. I'm just not super involved in it. So they'll make their link on Twitter a specific link that tracks how many clicks it's getting. But
Okay.
if I was scaling further, I might get more involved on that side of things. But given that I don't want to scale further than I am right now, I don't feel the need to
Yeah.
make big upgrades or changes to my system.
That's cool, man. Massive respect for that though, because you're just like very focused in on your stuff and you've done a great job on trying to get it. So you're obviously working on your course right now. What's the process being like creating a new course?
So probably a month ago, I outlined it, and then I did all the written portions. Some of it was repurposed from a community I used to run. A lot of it was brand new. So for probably 3 weeks, I was screenshotting posts to do analysis for. I was writing little how-to guides. I was writing summaries. And then up until about 3 days ago, probably the 10 days before that, I was filming for 45 minutes to maybe an hour and 15 per day. So started with the outline, right? What do I want to help people with and how am I going to do it? And then it was just executing and filling that outline in.
That's awesome, man. How did you learn how to create your course?
Um, I I think just by creating ones that were terrible and learning from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have never like bought a course on how to create courses, or those are
Yeah.
kind of hilarious. They they can definitely be very useful, especially if you like don't know what
Definitely.
you're doing. But it is a funny concept. I've never bought one of those, and I haven't really even uh, consumed a lot of content on exactly how to create courses. I just know from buying them that you want to break things down into bite-sized pieces, and you usually want to have like the core course and then a bunch of bonuses. So I
Yeah.
thought, basically, what would I want if I was starting from day one? Let me build that. So it's a how-to guide from start to finish. There's also a lot on writing, and then there are a bunch of documents that you can reference back to that help you write hooks or write templates or whatever else. So I would say my philosophy on creating products is create something that you would have wanted X number of years ago, because all my products are for my younger self, essentially. If you have a different content strategy, you can go a different way with that, but that's how I approach them.
That's cool, man. Yeah, there's a great guy called Pat Flynn. You might be familiar with. He was like a blogger, podcaster, and stuff. He has lots of free resources on YouTube. That's how I built my first course. Was like he breaks down exactly like structure, like even things like the back end of it, as in like how to manage all like the files through Google Drives and everything. Because it's a shit show, like audio and video. This is so because there's like 10 hours of content and another ten
Yeah.
hours of content that you've absolutely messed up in the process. Um, Before we finish up, I want to ask you one last question. Who is the biggest influence in you for writing?
Um, Let me think. I've never really been like a huge consumer of content, ironically. So when I started out, I didn't have a lot of people that I learned from. It was kind of just figuring it out on my own. If I had to choose one, I would say Ed Lattimore was a guy that I read very early on. He's bigger on Twitter than LinkedIn. I don't know if he even creates on LinkedIn, but he's a blogger, self improvement. He writes about writing also. So if I was choosing one person from early on that I learned a lot from, it would be him.
Cool, man. I gotta check him out. Never actually heard the name as well. Sounds pretty interesting though. But man, I want to say a massive thank you. This is a good session. Just coming up to 12:30 at night in Singapore, and I'd say a massive thank you, man.
For sure. Thanks for staying up, and thanks for having me on too.